FlutterFlow recently had their annual developer conference where they released FlutterFlow 5.0. But before I tell you some of the best features that came out as part of that release, I want to share with you something else real quick that I'm very, very proud of and that I owe it all to you guys.
So the winners for the Educators of the Year in no particular order are James No Code.
And so thank you very much for supporting me through all this time. I really couldn't have done it without you guys. And as a token of gratitude, I want to offer you guys a discount on my Mastering FlutterFlow and Mastering Supabase trainings. And you can learn all about the discount and the training in the description below the video. Now, the first feature that I want to show you is development environments. Okay, so if you go into your setting over here, you're going to be seeing a new tab here called Dev Environments. And the idea is you can create multiple environments, and in each environment, you can have different variables here, okay? So here we have 3 environments, and we also have a variable called environment, okay? So in this case, I am storing the current environment, okay? So for production, it's production. If you go into stage, it's stage. And if you click on dev, you're going to see development, right? And then in my app, I can display this value, right? By simply clicking here, scrolling down this familiar screen, and then you're going to see all the way at the bottom, environment values. And this is our variable here. So I can simply select it, and this is going to display the current value for the specific environment that we are in. In this case right now, we're basically displaying the current environment that we're in, right? So if I go back here to dev environments, I'm currently in production because you can see that that is selected. So if I run my app, it's going to show this value. Okay, so let's go ahead and run our app so that you can see how this works. And as you can see, it says production here. Okay, so now if I go back and I select stage, and I rebuild my app, it's gonna say stage. Okay, let me show you. And now, as you can see, it says stage here because the current environment that this app is running in the context of the app is the staging. Okay, so if we have a lot of these variables, right, these environment variables, they're gonna be active when we are in the stage environment. And you can add more. You can also delete these, right? So if I right click, I can delete this dev. Let's say I no longer need it, I'm just going to be left with production and stage, okay? Another big benefit is that if you're using Firebase, right? So if you go into Firebase, your Firebase config is now environment aware, okay? So you can have different configs for different environments, right? So here I have a production environment, here I have a stage environment. So if I'm using Firebase, I can have different setups. And then all I need to do is, click on dev environments and just change my environments. And my app is going to connect to different databases, right? It's going to have all of these environmental variables, right? Like we discussed. But in this case, it's also going to be able to connect to different maybe Firebase configs, right? So you can connect to different data depending on your environment. So this is an awesome feature because remember, in your app, you can easily, pick up this value and do whatever you want with it, right? And when it comes to traditional coding, right, this has been around since the beginning of time, right? All the apps that, you were able to build or you can build, today with traditional coding have access to the environment. So you can always see where you're at. So I'm really happy that they finally rolled out this feature here in FlutterFlow. Now, the next feature that I want to talk about is actually amazing because it allows you to build all kinds of apps that you couldn't really do before. And this is the introduction of a ton of new gesture detector callbacks, okay? So if you select like a widget, right, and you go to this action panel, if you open this up, if you click here, you have access to so many triggers. Take a look at all of these triggers, and this really opens up a ton of new possibilities, right? This opens up, so many new apps that you can build quickly and easily, right? So if you take a look here, you have so many awesome things, right? You have your regular tab, double tap, long press, but you also have force press. You have horizontal drag. You have horizontal drag and drag start, long press. You have all of these. You have panning, right? So if your widget is being panned, you're going to be told about it, right? This is amazing because you can build so many awesome, amazing apps. And just to get your kind of juices flowing, I want to show you two awesome examples, okay? So the first example is actually a very simple example, okay? So we have this container and we have this icon here, which is an AC unit, okay, icon. And let me show you what happens when we run our app. So when we run our app, when you drag this icon, you see how the icon is being dragged as well. Okay, you can drag it left to right, you can drag it up and down. And as you can see, the icon goes wherever the cursor is. Okay. And that is because we are being told what's happening, as we drag on this container here, right? So as we drag, we are being told where the mouse is, and we can animate the icon there. Okay, so how exactly is this done? Well, if we go back to our app, there's a couple of things happening here. First, we have the container, right? Where the icon is, right? The container is hosting the icon. And we have a couple of flows here, right? Chiefly, we're using on horizontal drag update and on vertical drag update, right? So basically, anytime we drag either horizontally or vertically, FlutterFlow is telling us the position of the mouse cursor, okay? And because we know the position, we can animate the icon there, right? And so the first thing that we need to do is we need to save the position. And for that, we're using page state. So if you click over here, we have page state. So we have offset X and offset Y. Offset means where it is in relation to the center, right? So if X is negative, it's going to be here. If Y is negative, it's going to be here. If X is positive, it's going to be here. If X is positive, it's going to be here. And if Y is positive, it's going to be here. It's that XY plane. And so we are tracking the offset right here as page state variables. And as we're dragging it, right? So let's say we're dragging it horizontally, we're updating page state, but we're also animating the widget, right? We have this action called widget animation, right? As you can see here. And in order to have this animation, we first need to configure it, right? So on the icon level, if we go over here, we have this animation, and make sure you have it set up on action trigger, okay? Which means that you need to manually trigger it in your action flows, not on page load, because that's just going to trigger it every time the page loads. You don't want that in this specific example. And so what we have here is we have a slide animation, and this final position is the offset, right where we are dragging. Okay, so because we have these new triggers, FlutterFlow is telling us what's happening with the mouse as we drag something. We can animate it using this standard animation. Okay, we can simply go to final position for horizontal slide here and final position for this slide here. And you have to set it up like I have it here. So duration is 0 because there's really no duration, right? It's wherever this is set. Okay, so this is a very, very simple example. Now you may be thinking, well, James, this is nice and all, but what's the real world kind of practical example? Well, let me show you another example. This example is actually directly from FlutterFlow's documentation, and you can kind of read more about it, right, on FlutterFlow's documentation page, because they have a couple of really nice real world examples for this. But the idea here is that we have our shopping cart, okay? And we have a bunch of items. Now, the way I have it set up is I have a list view, and I'm using these items here, right? These individual items as containers, right? So I have this container called cart list item. I have it here. And so when we run the app, you're going to see some awesome magic. So we have this shopping cart, item 1, item 2, item 3, etc. But what I can do is I can drag it. Well, I can drag it, let's say, to the right. And if I drag it enough, see, if I drag it a little bit, nothing happens. It comes back. when I release. But if I drag it, far enough, it deletes it. Okay, so this is just the idea of the item, right? So now you don't see the item, right? Because now it starts from 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's say I want to delete this item. Well, if I drag it a little bit, nothing happens. If I drag it a lot, it's gone. Okay, so that is one practical example. And this is actually awesome because before it was a pain to do it, right? You'd have to use a custom widget. It would just be annoying, right? But now you have feedback anytime you're doing something, dragging, long pressing something, a bunch of other things. And if you can leverage, right? So let me show you how this is done. So it's done in two parts, right? We have the callback part, right? The triggers that are being triggered on horizontal or vertical dragging. In this case, it's only horizontal, right? It doesn't make sense to drag it up and down. It makes sense to drag it, sideways, right? So we have the triggers, but we also have the animation, okay? So let me show you the first thing, right? So we have this container and we have our triggers, right? This is what starts everything, right? So if you open this, we have just two triggers, right? And these are both horizontal events. Okay, so because we want to know, what happens as the item is being dragged. This is this drag update. But we also want to know when it finishes, when the dragging event is finished, because we need to understand whether the person dragged it just a little bit, right? Maybe by accident, or maybe they changed their mind, or they dragged it by a lot, because that is a known kind of a gesture, right? You drag it out a little bit, or if you really want to delete it, you're going to be dragging it a lot. And so when the dragging is done, we need to decide what we want to do. Do we want to delete it, or do we want to just bring it back, right? And that is why, so with this update, this is standard behavior. We're just updating component state, right? And so we're using this code expression where we take the offset, right? And we take the delta, how much it moved, and we basically add it together, right? And we get a position from that, okay? And remember, Patreon members are going to get access to this app, and this is, invaluable stuff. So you definitely want to join our amazing Patreon community, all right? And so what we are doing is while the person is dragging it, remember this is this drag update, while it's being dragged, right? We are updating the state, we're updating the offset. And then we're doing this widget animation, right? On this container, right? So what is this animation? Well, we have this animation. We go over here on action trigger, we have this animation. This is a slide animation. And we're only updating this horizontal slide final position because the initial position is 0, right? It's always going to start at 0. But the final position will depend where the person is dragging it. And that is why you have this really nice behavior, right? It's kind of like this. It starts at 0, but it's going to animate to whatever the final position is. And this is exactly what we want, right? And so as a result, we have this really nice dragging behavior, right? So if I go back over here and I go over here, we have this widget animation. We're updating it, but we're also animating it, right? We need to do that and we need to animate it. Now, when the person releases, right, they need to release, right? So I have this, mouse pad here. When I release my finger, this gets called drag end. And here we start off with a condition because we need to decide what we want to do. And so what I'm doing is I'm checking this page state variable, right? This component state variable, excuse me, right? Because we have a component. And I'm asking it, is it greater than 100, right? So the idea is if they dragged it by a lot, it's going to be greater than 100. If they dragged it by a little, it's going to be less than 100, okay? Very simple. So if it's greater than 100, we want to execute a callback called delete item, and then we send this item ID here, right? And that is the position of the item there, okay? And this callback is going to delete it, right? So we have this callback. I'm going to show you the callback. If it's less than 100, so the person dragged it just a little bit, we want to reverse the animation. We want to bring it back to initial state. And that is why, if I drag it a little bit, it comes back. If we didn't have this, right? If we didn't have this, it would just be stuck there. It would just stay here when the person released it. And you don't want that. Okay. And last but not least, we want to reset the value of the component state because whatever happened, if we revert, if we change our mind, or we do the whole thing, we want to reset the value of the component state, okay? Especially if they change their mind, right? If they did a little bit, we want to do it. Obviously, if they deleted it, that component is not there, it doesn't really matter, okay? And so this execute callback is really nice, right? Because this allows us to take a certain action based on, what's happening, right? And so where is this callback? Well, we have this component, remember, and this component has a bunch of parameters. And one of these parameters is this delete item parameter, right? And this gets an item ID. And that way, when you define this component, right? So if I go over here, right here, where I'm listing it, remember, I have a list here with these components. When I actually place this component, I am passing all of these things. And I also pass the actual action, the callback, right? And this is it right here, right? And what I'm doing is I'm basically removing this item at index, right? We're passing the item ID because it knows, because each item in the list has its own item ID. And so all we need to do is pass it here, and then it's going to delete it. It's just going to remove it at that index, right? And then I'm showing a snack bar with the item ID just for testing, right? You're not going to be doing that in production. You're going to say like deleted item so and so. But here's kind of what it's doing, right? And that is because each component has a bunch of parameters that it takes in. So once we pass these parameters, the component is going to have access. So, and one of these parameters could be an action, just like with custom widgets and custom actions. You can pass a callback, which is another function that gets executed whenever you want. Really powerful stuff. And so we have a function, delete item, and it does something. All of this just removes the item and shows a snack bar. And that is why you have this really, really nice behavior. So that is another example, right? And check out FlutterFlow's documentation. They have a couple of other examples there as well. But this one is something that you probably want to be doing in all of your e-commerce apps, right? Anytime you're going to have a shopping cart in your app, this is going to be a no-brainer. And you can do this because we now have access to like 50 plus gesture detection callbacks that you can use. All of these triggers, including like horizontal dragging position, vertical dragging, force touch, force press, long press, etc., etc. Tons and tons of stuff there. So a really, really powerful feature. The next feature that I want to show you is shortcuts. Okay, so now you can respond to different shortcuts. Okay, so this is especially useful when it comes to web apps, right? It's not going to be that useful when it comes to like touch apps, like mobile apps and so forth. But when it comes to web apps and desktop apps, this is going to be fundamental, right? Because I don't know any apps, right? Desktop apps or web apps that I use that don't have any shortcuts, right? Chances are they all have shortcuts because they make your life easier. Okay, so how does this work? Well, when you have a page, you're going to be creating shortcuts at the top level, right? So if you click over here, you have your action editor, and if you click over here, you can add a shortcut, right? So let me go ahead and delete the shortcut. And when you start with a new trigger, you can add a shortcut right here. And so what you want to do is you want to click here and you want to record the shortcut. So let's say I want to record like a random shortcut, Command Shift Y. I press this, and now I have a shortcut that triggers an action flow. And so let's say I want to do something like, I want to do a snack bar, show snack bar, and I want to say shortcut triggered. Okay, something like this. So now when we actually press the shortcut over here, it's going to trigger it, right? So before we run it, let me go ahead and fix my nav bar, because this page is almost last. It should not be almost last. Let me go and fix it. So this should be right here. So now it's in order. Okay. Let me go ahead and rebuild my app, and I can show you how this works. All right, here we are. And if you go over here, we have the shortcut then. And so let me go ahead and execute my shortcut. And it says here shortcut triggered, right? If I do Command Shift Y, there it is. So we can add more shortcuts, right? So if I go over here, I select this, open this up. I can click here and I can add another shortcut. So let's say we want to do Command Shift R. Okay, hit this, and now we can say snack bar, second shortcut tree. Okay, let's go ahead and rebuild our app. All right, here we are. Go to this page over here, and I think it was Command Shift R, and it says second shortcut trigger. And if I do Command Shift Y, it's the first shortcut. Okay, so this is an awesome feature, right? A must-have feature when you're building web apps or desktop apps, not so much for mobile touch apps, right? Because you're going to be touching things. You're not going to be executing shortcuts on a mobile app. Okay, so another really, really nice feature that brings it home for certain types of apps. Now, the next feature that I want to show you is an awesome, awesome feature, but it took me a little bit of time to understand how it works. It's a very, very powerful feature. And this is a feature that allows you to pass entire widgets as parameters to your components. Okay, so remember, a component is basically anything that's wrapped up kind of in itself. I can take, a piece of this, like I can go in here and I can say, well, this is a component now, right? I can take anything. It's essentially a part of my app. Or a better way to explain it, it's a part of a widget tree, right? So if I click over here, I can convert this to a component right here. And with components, just like with functions or anything else, you can pass parameters. But the difference here is that you can now pass entire widgets as parameters, right? So if you've created other widgets as components, as other components, you can pass them to a widget, kind of this wrapper widget, as a parameter. Okay, so you might be asking yourself at this point, this is great, kind of makes sense, kind of doesn't. What does it do? What do I need it for? Well, let me show you an example, okay? And this is also directly from FlutterFlow's documentation. They also have it on their site, but I want to show you this in action, right? I'm going to show you a live example, okay? So here we have basically a list of components, okay? And each component is being passed a widget as an argument, okay? So we have this custom input field, and they're all very similar, right? They kind of all look the same, except the actual input field could be different, but everything else is the same. And that's really the purpose of this feature, is to create very, uniform fields, this uniform field where a lot of things are going to be the same or very similar, right? Same styling and all that, but the actual widget can be swapped out, okay? So as you can see, I have 4 of these custom input fields, and these are components, right? So if I click over here, I have this custom input field, and this input field has a label and it has a widget that we're going to be passing, okay? So we have a column, we have a text, and we have the widget, right? And so what's happening here is this component, right? It has 2 arguments, a string argument and a widget builder. What is a widget builder? A widget builder is a type of argument that allows you to pass an entire widget. And in this case, this is going to be another component. Okay, so you can click over here and you can add an argument. And, you can pass another widget, right? Widget 2. And I can click over here, scroll all the way down. I can have this widget builder. And that way I can pass not like a string, not like an array, a list, but an actual widget. And that's going to be a component over here. Okay, so let me go ahead and remove it, because we don't really need that. And so this custom input field is basically, it's a column. So it's gonna arrange its the children vertically, right, from top to bottom. So we're gonna have a text, which is actually gonna be passed, from the outside, and it's gonna display the label. And we're going to be displaying a widget, which is also going to be passed from the outside, right? And so if we go back to our app, we are now using these, right? And over here, we're passing, the label that's going to be displayed here, and we're also passing the widget. So if I click here, I can select my widget. I can also, these are all the components that I have on my app. As you can see, I have 4 components. It obviously is not allowing me to use this one because that is what we're using now, right? So you have kind of this top level, this parent component, and then inside of it, you can pass other components. Okay, so I can also use a cart list item if I want, but that doesn't really work here. Instead, what I did was I created two fields, right? Input fields that we can use. So the first one is a drop-down component here, and the second is a text field. Okay, and what I'm doing here in this custom field is, when I'm actually like displaying it, I'm telling it, well, for these fields, pass this text field, and it's going to go ahead and pass that text field. And for this one, I'm passing this dropdown, and it's going to go ahead and pass that dropdown. Okay, so it's basically a way to wrap one component inside another, right? To create this kind of uniform UI, right? And this is nice because, I want all of these fields to be the same. I just want, have the options, the flexibility to have a different field. So that way I can create, a bunch of these components for input, like a text input, a drop down, maybe a radio button input, all of these. And then I can simply pass them, right? And it's all going to look exactly the same. Okay, so go ahead and read the documentation on FlutterFlow's website, but it's basically a way to pass a component as an argument. Okay, just think of it like that. Like before, you were able to pass, just simple data types, right? Maybe complex data types, right? Strings, integers, doubles, your own custom data types, and that's about it. But now you can actually pass another component. Okay, and that way you can create kind of like more sophisticated and kind of more elaborate UI interfaces. Okay, because in this case, it kind of makes sense. I'm creating a form, and I don't want to do all of this from scratch. I just want to define one component as a text field and then just reuse it, right? Also, it's also a great way to reuse stuff, right? And so this is another really nice feature. It's a rather kind of an advanced feature, but it allows you reuse things. Okay, and this is exactly what I did here. So definitely check it out. Really, really awesome feature, especially for bigger apps, right? For simple apps, maybe not so much, but for bigger apps, I can see this being super useful. Next awesome feature that was introduced is the ability to reuse your code, your existing, API calls, your widgets, everything as a library, right? So if I click over here and I search for library, I have this option publish as a library. And so as you can see, I already have this published before, okay? And so what I need to do is I need to create a version over here, and I need to give it a description. I'm gonna add a description, new feature. I'm gonna say commit changes first, new feature, hit commit. And now I can publish this as a library, right? I'm gonna hit publish, and it's telling me dependency published successfully. Now, what I can do is I can go back here and I can search for project dependency. And this is a new screen here that displays all of the dependencies that are being used in our project. Now, you typically are not going to be too concerned with this unless you have a very, very good reason. But the key here is this: you can add a dependency, right? And you can select a library project, project ID, etc., etc. So I'm going to go ahead and copy my project ID, copy it over here, and that shows me all the stuff in my project. Now I'm basically adding the same app here, right? That's typically not what you're going to be doing. You're going to be adding another library that you may have used. And so it's going to go ahead and add all of this here. And now we have this in the dependency, right? So we have all the app states, we have the components, we have the custom functions that we can use in our app, right? How cool is this, right? How awesome is this, right? We have, one custom function here, but, if this was another app and we had like a bunch of awesome custom functions in the other app, they would be available in our new app. And so this is another awesome feature that allows you to reuse your code by making it as a dependency in your project. So you don't need to keep rewriting functions and redoing the same thing and really reinventing the wheel, right? You can do it once and then you can reuse it in your future apps. Last but not least, you also have an ability to do branch commits. So if you click over here, you have your branching here. So what exactly is a branch? Well, you can think of a branch as a copy of your app. So generally speaking, you're going to have just one branch. But let's say you want to test out a new feature that might break some of the other, functionalities in your app. So instead of going out and, doing all of this in your current branch, it would be a lot better to create another branch and test out the feature and see if it works. And then, if it works, you can continue working on that branch. If it doesn't, then you can just delete that branch and come back, to a point in your app development before you started working on this feature. So this is a great way to kind of, build your apps. And so here you can see our branch history here. And if you click over here, you can create a new branch or you can create a commit, right, in the current branch, right? So if I click over here, I can create a new commit. So let's say, I've been working on this feature all weekend, I'm tired, and I want to create a new commit with that new feature. So I will say something like, a new feature is done, okay? And that is a new checkpoint. And so later on, if I start doing something and I decide, oh, I screwed something up, I can always come back to this current branch because now I have a checkpoint, right? And you can also create a new branch if you want, right? So if you're working on another feature, you're working on some heavy functionality, you can click here and create a new branch. And this is you can, have it work off this main branch because that is the only branch we have. So let's say we have like high-tech awesome feature. I can do that and I can create a new branch. And now anything that I do over here will be on that branch, right? It's going to be on that branch. And so, if I decide that I'm happy with it, I can merge my changes back into the original branch. Or if I decide, hey, this didn't work out, it's not a good thing, I can simply, discard this branch and go on the main branch, right? So if I click over here, as you can see, I'm on this awesome feature branch here. And here, I have my branching option. I can merge or I can close this branch. So if I decide this is not something I want, I can simply delete this branch here, awesome feature, and it's going to go back to the main branch here. Okay. And so while there were other features that were introduced with FlutterFlow 5.0, I felt that these were the main ones that are really newsworthy that you should know about and you should leverage them when you are building your apps because they're going to be making your life a lot easier. And as a result, you'll be able to build higher quality apps a lot quicker. So definitely check them out. And really the best way to kind of, get hands-on experience with these features is to be able to view and or clone this app that I have right here, okay? And you'll be able to do just that when you join our amazing Patreon community. Because remember, when you join our amazing Patreon community, not only will you get access to this app right here, you'll get access to pretty much all my other apps. They're all there. They're all waiting for you to view them, to clone them, to learn from them, to incorporate the techniques, the functionalities into your own apps that you may be building right now or you're thinking about building in the future. So definitely check out our amazing Patreon community. There's some awesome members on there, some really, really great people that are eager to learn from one another. And by the way, I almost forgot, when you join our amazing Patreon community, you're going to get access to my Patreon exclusive weekly up-to-date no-code podcast. And this is a podcast where in video format where I talk about some of the things that have happened that, this past week, some things that I'm working on, some future projects, some kind of thoughts, and I also answer your guys' questions, right? So if you're serious about no code, you're serious about building apps, check out our amazing Patreon community and definitely become a member. You're going to get a ton of value that you're not going to get elsewhere. All right. So check out the first link in the description, and I hope to see you inside the community.